they don't really lack the will to behave well. It's not that simple. What they struggle with are the skills.
What I have to learn inside myself is what I'm ultimately modeling,
Correct.
Especially for my kids. So what is that? What is that regulation?
I think empathy is the cornerstone of regulation in interactions between us humans. Show me any kid or any adult who really struggles with their behavior, and I will show you somebody who's struggling at least one, if not 5 of those areas. It's just confirmation that this is about skill, not will.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of The Best of You. Today we are exploring a mindset shift that can transform the hardest moments with the people in your life. Whether it's a child melting down, a partner who shuts down, a colleague who stonewalls, or a parent who pushes your buttons. The shift is the simple idea that most challenging behavior is about skills, not will. When someone repeatedly does that maddening thing that drives us crazy, our brains tend to assign motive. We think they don't care about us. We think they're being selfish or difficult. We think they're just trying to get their own way. We assume ill intent. But what if instead we trained ourselves to ask, what skill is missing in this moment? And how might we work with this other person to build that skill? My guest today has spent 3 decades showing families, schools, workplaces, and systems how to do exactly that. Dr. Stuart Ablon is a clinical psychologist, and he's one of the leading voices on understanding and changing concerning behavior in any setting. He's the founder and director of Think Kids in the Department of Psychiatry at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. He's an associate professor at Harvard Medical School, and he's the developer and leading teacher of collaborative problem solving, the approach behind the mantra you may have heard: people do well if they can. Dr. Ablon is the author of several terrific books, including his latest, Changeable: How Collaborative Problem Solving Changes Lives at Home, at School, and Work. His work is practical, it's compassionate, and it's incredibly effective because it builds skills and preserves relationships. We're going to touch on a number of topics today, but here's what you'll hear that you can apply to anyone who's frustrating you, but also to yourself. You're going to learn the 5 core skill areas that sit underneath all behavior and how crucial these skills are for all of us. You're going to learn how to stay regulated yourself and swap out judgment for curiosity when dealing with a difficult behavior. We're talking about why boundaries still matter. We're not throwing those out, but how to reach them differently and more collaboratively. And you're going to learn why understanding another person's concerns, another person's perspective helps us arrive at real solutions that are realistic and mutually beneficial at home, at work, and everywhere in between. I am so thrilled to welcome Dr. Stuart Ablon to the podcast today. This is truly a life-changing conversation. I have thought about it so many times throughout the day since recording it. And he's also brought along a gift for our community. It's Think Kids. His organization has a self-paced online course for parents and caregivers to learn their collaborative problem-solving step by step. So for listeners of this episode, you can access it free of charge with the coupon code BESTOFYOU. It's available in English and Spanish, and we'll touch on it today. But if you want more, we'll put the direct link and the code in the show notes, along with more ways to connect with the amazing resources at thinkkids.org. I am so thrilled to bring you my conversation with Dr. Stuart Ablon. Well, I would love to just get started, Dr. Ablon, for my listeners who aren't familiar with your work, and I hope all of them are going to grab a copy of this book that you've written. It's just so helpful. It's so wise and practical. But tell my listeners a little bit about your work specifically, where you focus, and this background that you have working not only with children, but with really unique cases with kids that are really struggling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I've spent my whole career at this point, which 30 years or so, really mostly around trying to help people understand kids and adolescents and why some of them have a hard time managing their behavior and what to do about it. And, I've been able to, as you mentioned, work in some really challenging circumstances where, you've got kids with severe trauma histories. You've got, staff who don't receive much training in trying to support these kids, and it can lead to some really difficult situations. And we've been fortunate to be able to try to help a lot of different organizations and kids and families in some of those toughest of settings. So I'm talking about in, residential treatment facilities and hospitals and detention centers and things like that. But the lessons that we've learned over time can be applied to every parent's interaction with every child, not necessarily a child who struggles severely, but all kids can have a hard time managing their behavior at some times. And as parents, we all struggle to figure out the best way to parent our kids.
I think there's something so compelling, and I found it in my own work, both as a therapist, but also as someone out in the community and the service work that I do, that when you see that there are principles and truths that apply across the board.
Yes.
And this leads me to one of your biggest, I think the things that you emphasize that I think is so crucial, and I want you to unpack it for us, but you really emphasize the importance of skills.
Yes.
That when anyone, it could be a kid, it could be an adult, it could be a spouse, it could be a parent, anyone in our lives is struggling. When we find ourselves bumping up against this, like, why does this keep happening? Whether in someone else, maybe in ourselves, that we tend to default to this idea of willpower.
Yes.
If I only tried harder, I could fix it. If they would only try harder, they would fix it. And you found that to be a really problematic framework. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. It's mostly problematic because it's wrong. Forever, the conventional wisdom has been that, particularly with kids, that when kids aren't sort of behaving the ways that we as parents or teachers or other adults want them to, that they're sort of doing that on purpose. And they're doing it to either get things like attention or, get their own way or things like that. And actually, when you study kids who have a hard time managing their behavior, what you realize is it's not about that at all. That, something we've learned now, there's probably 40, almost 50 years of research that has shown that kids, or as you point out, anybody for that matter, who struggles to manage their behavior, they don't really lack the will to behave well. It's not that simple. What they struggle with are the skills necessary to manage their behavior. And that's a new way of thinking about things, relatively new, but it makes a lot of sense. When you think about your average day, whether you're a kid or an adult, there's a whole bunch of skills you need to be able to employ to behave yourself well. You've got to be flexible. You've got to tolerate frustration. You've got to do good problem solving. And if those aren't skills you're good at, what it leads to is you sort of acting in ways that other people don't want you to act. Either doing things people don't want you to do or not doing things that people want you to do.
It is such a paradigm shift as I've read your work and engaged with it, to apply it. Even again, you can apply it with your kids, but even with someone in, a sibling or where it's like, why are they doing that? They must not care about me. We impute a sort of moral cause in a way, almost. And understandably, sometimes because the impact is that it hurts.
Well, so that's, I think, a really crucial point, which is, so why do we tend to believe that behavior is under people's control and they just must not be trying hard enough, or if they're doing things that are harmful or hurtful to me, that they're doing it on purpose? I think it's because, when somebody's behaving in a challenging fashion towards us, we're not in the best position to be able to sort of really understand what's going on because we get frustrated.
Yeah.
We lose our ability to think straight. When somebody's being difficult, when they're not doing what we want them to do, when they're disrespecting us, when we don't feel like an authority figure with our child, or worse yet, when we feel scared, when we feel unsafe, we don't respond with the smart part of our brain. Instead, we react more impulsively, and we sort of want to, try to regain control. And the way we humans tend to do that is reaching for power.
Yes. Oh, that's so well stated. It sort of pulls out the worst of us. We default. And again, that's not to excuse the behavior. And it's not to say that there isn't something that needs to be dealt with out here. But it does remind me, again, I mentioned to you right before we jumped on that my background is in the psychology of religion. It reminds me of, frankly, one of Jesus's teachings when it said, take out the speck in your own eye first, right? It's an opportunity. I talk about in IFS language to take a U-turn. What's happening inside of me? And my default is to go to blame and judgment.
Yes.
Which doesn't help. And that's actually more of a reflection of what's happening inside of me than
Correct.
It is what's happening inside of them.
Correct. Well, it's a reflection, I think, of both, because there's a fundamental truth, which is that dysregulation, sort of losing our ability to think straight, is contagious. And so, like, if you're a parent and your child is beginning to lose it, it's contagious, and we begin to lose it too. And now the nice thing, though, is on the flip side, regulation, keeping your calm, maintaining control, that is also contagious. And it's in fact why many children develop skills to be able to manage their emotions, because they've had a lot of experiences with a parent that helps them see what that's like. They co-regulate, if you will, and develop the skills themselves.
Okay, so let's break this down, because there's a couple of things going on here for the listener, right? So we have to, especially as parents, but again, in any relationship, someone else's, misbehavior or frustrating behavior, it gives us an invitation not to, like you said, grasp for power, grasp for control. It gives us an opportunity to practice being regulated, right? And so we have to engage this process of we have to have our own skills in place to be able to do that, because we have to model it. That's how we're going to best model it, especially for our kids, but really in any relationship. So what is that skill that I need? Right? What are those skills? You've mentioned a couple of them, but suddenly it's like, I know I can't just be angry. I know I can't just try to grasp control. I've kind of figured out enough to know that. But what is it that I do need to do? Because what I have to learn inside myself is what I'm ultimately modeling, especially for my kids. So what is that? What is that regulation? How do we unpack that in ourselves first? Yeah,
well, so first off, I would say that what's really helpful to equip parents or anybody with is a guiding mantra, if you will. And, the notion of skill, not will is helpful, but I think a more powerful version of that is the philosophy that we teach, which is kids do well if they can. Not kids do well if they want to, but kids do well if they can. And same is true of parents, any adult.
That's good.
People do well if they can. If you can try to remember that whoever you're dealing with that might be frustrating you, it's really hard to imagine that person is setting out to behave poorly on purpose. Look, all of us want to do the best we can. I mean, isn't that true fundamentally of all of us, that we're trying the best we can to handle whatever the world is throwing at us with the skills we have? And if you can remember that, people do well if they can, it can position you in a more empathic place.
Yes.
And the reason that's so important is I think empathy is the cornerstone of regulation in interactions between us humans. What I mean by that is when your kid is starting to escalate, as opposed to getting pissed off and frustrated with them, if you can maintain some mindset of curiosity, of non-judgmental interest in what's going on, what are you having a hard time with, and how can I help? And if you can have that kind of a stance, that's the beginning of staying regulated yourself and then helping to regulate your child in this case. Oh,
that's so helpful. That's so practical. So even just that subtle shift from what's wrong with them to I'm curious, which is exactly what we're trying to do in the work of getting curious about parts of ourselves.
Yes.
We don't again, it translates to, instead of beating myself up that I'm acting in a certain way, what we respond to is, oh, that's so interesting. I just had a reaction. I wonder what that was about. We're extending that to the people in our lives. I'm
Yes.
curious. I wonder what that's about.
And curiosity, is part of empathy, right? Like people, I think,
Yes.
misunderstand the concept of empathy, the word empathy. People often think empathy means like, just sort of show you care or something. But actually, when I talk about empathy, that's not what I mean at all. I mean the actual definition of the word empathy, which means to understand. And if you work really hard to understand where somebody else is coming from, their concern, their perspective, their point of view, what's hard for them about a situation, whether you agree with it or not, you don't have to agree with it, just trying to understand it, that's really calming. It's very regulating. And I often say, I think it's the most powerful human regulator we have, is trying to understand somebody else's perspective or point of view.
That's so well stated. It doesn't necessarily mean even feeling sorry for. It doesn't mean I agree with.
No,
It
or
means,
disagree with.
or disagree with.
Right.
It means I get it. I get why. And that can be a process. That can take a little while. So is this kind of leading into this collaborative problem solving that you talk
Yes.
about?
Yes. Yeah. We talk about this notion of, look, people do well if they can. We're all doing the best we can with the skills we have. This is about skill, not will.
Yep.
We help people, by the way, get clear on which specific skills
Yep.
Somebody might be struggling with, whether that's my child or myself. And
Yep.
there's, there tends to be sort of 5 core areas. But then we teach people, okay, well, so now if you've got a problem with your child or anyone else, you got to think about your options, which is how you're going to handle that. And what we teach people is generally you have 3 options. You can try to make your child do what you want them to do. You can sort of do it the way they want it or handle it the way they want it, or you can try to work it out with them. And the work it out with them, we call collaborative problem solving. And that's where we teach a very specific process that starts, not surprisingly, with empathy.
Got it.
Understanding your child's perspective or point of view before you go anywhere near sharing your perspective or point of view. Not your solution, by the way, to the problem, but your perspective, your point of view, what you're worried about, your concern.
Seek first to understand.
Seek first to understand. And by the way, if you understand your child first, they're going to be much more likely to listen to your point of view.
That's right.
And the reason I always do this with my hands is it's my way of reminding myself and others, this is how you know you're collaborating. You have 2 sets of concerns on the table. Not just your child's, not just yours, but both. You've heard them out. You've asked them to hear where you're coming from. Now you can collaborate. Now you can invite them to problem solve.
You know how every home has that one spot you think about all day? For me, it's my bed, the place I can finally exhale after the end of a long day. Some mornings it's almost impossible to get out of bed, and I blame 3 things. My Cozy Earth bamboo sheets, the bubble cuddle blanket, and their women's bamboo stretch knit long sleeve pajama set. The sheets are made from viscose from bamboo and are naturally temperature regulating, wicking away heat and moisture so you actually sleep a few degrees cooler. The bubble cuddle blanket is pure luxury, ultra soft with a textured bubble design and a plush mid-weight feel that makes you want to stay put. And the women's bamboo stretch knit long sleeve pajama set, it's the softest loungewear I've ever owned, perfect for curling up with a book or easing into the day. Cozy Earth makes it easy to try everything risk-free with a 100-night sleep trial and a 10-year warranty, so comfort like this lasts. Make your bed and your downtime your happy place. Head to CozyEarth.com and use my code BESTOFYOU for 40% off. And if you get a post-purchase survey, let them know how you heard about Cozy Earth right here. Because your bed should be more than a place to sleep. It should be a retreat. Cozy Earth makes that possible. Okay, I love this. I want you to walk us through a tough example of that. But before we get there, could you give me those 5 skills?
Of course. Yeah. And they're really 5 areas of skill with a bunch of skills embedded in them. So the first one is language and communication skills. And this is why I always say, look, the 2-year-olds, we call it the terrible twos. One of the reasons we call it the terrible twos is they don't have great language and communication skills yet. They're not able to let people know what's bothering them with subtlety. They're not able to articulate their concerns, their perspective, their point of view, to engage in verbal back and forth to solve a problem. Language and communication skills are crucial, and not just for little kids. This is true of us adults as well. So that's one category. Second category, attention and working memory skills. Sort of making your way through the world and managing your behavior well requires a lot of focusing on things that people need you to focus on at certain times, whether you want to or not, and then shifting to other things and shifting back and holding a bunch of information in your head at one time. That's a whole set of skills that's crucial.
Whole set of skills.
Emotion and self-regulation skills, which is a fancy way of saying your ability to manage or control your emotional response to stuff, and your ability to control yourself, like your impulse control, for instance. Can you stop and think before you act? That's the third category. Fourth category, cognitive flexibility skills, fancy way of saying flexible thinking. Are you somebody who tends to be a bit more rigid or concrete or literal in your thinking, more black and white, or can you see the grays? Are you somebody who does great as long as everything goes according to the plan, the routine, the schedule, but if you throw a wrench into it, if there's something unpredictable, novel, you have a hard time. Flexible thinking is so important when it comes to managing our behavior. And then the last category is social thinking skills. There's so much that goes into adaptive behavior in social interactions. From basics like how do you start a conversation, how do you gauge whether somebody's interested in what you are engaging in, how do you know how your behavior impacts others, how you come across, to empathy, that skill we've talked about before, which is a very complex social thinking skill. And those are the 5 categories. And I'll tell you what, show me any kid or any adult who really struggles with their behavior, and I will show you somebody who's struggling at least one, if not 5 of those areas. And if they're struggling in any of those areas, it's just confirmation that this is about skill, not will.
So listening, first of all, if I put my parent hat on, I almost feel overwhelmed because kids don't come into the world. We do not come into the world knowing these things. We have to learn them.
Yes.
And many of us arrive at adulthood with deficits in many of these areas. So number one, baseline, I think we can all feel empathy. That's a lot.
It is a lot. And the good news is a lot of times kids develop these skills despite the fact that we don't consciously try to practice those skills and help them build them. So that's the good news. But many times you're right. Kids, they don't acquire those skills. And many of us adults, struggle. And by the way, I don't think any of us gets a clean bill of health on all 5 of those categories, right? Like we all have our relative strengths and weaknesses on that list.
Oh, that's well put. Like some of them may come more naturally than others, and some of them we have to work at harder than others. Okay, so now take me into this. So we've got that as our baseline. This is what, sort of the ideal, when we have some level of skill across all those 5 categories, we may be able to function fairly well, not perfectly, but we may be able to go through those normal relational, where we can problem solve, where we can honor somebody else's perspective, where we can speak up for our own perspective, all of those things. But where we see let's say with a child, let's say where we see a real behavioral breakdown, a real issue that is causing dysfunction, how do we come along collaboratively? Can you give me an example of maybe an actual example from your own practice or on your own life where you've detected, here's what we're missing. And it can't be academic in that moment, right? You have to engage starting with that step of curiosity. What would that look like?
Well, so the first thing you want to do, if you're going to practice this kind of collaborative problem solving, is you need to clarify what problems you want to try solving.
Yep.
And I always tell people, you can't solve a behavior, but you can solve a problem that leads to some kind of a challenging behavior. So as parents, the first thing I do in my practice is I have people list, okay, so what are the types of situations where the behavior that you're not so wild about comes up? Is it trouble waking up in the morning to get down to breakfast and go to school? Is it spending too much time on on the computer in the afternoon? Is it not getting down to their homework? Is it refusing to eat what you've served at dinner? Is it the list goes on and on and on. And what you want to do is you want to get as specific as possible, because that's your list of problems you want to solve, and you want to pick one at a time. And you want to try to work on them proactively, which is very important. Don't wait until the problem starts to happen, okay? So if this is a child who isn't getting up and out in the morning, in time for school and making the whole family late, the worst time to work on that is in the morning when you're all running late.
Yep.
Pick a time where a kid is calm and accessible. You've had some time to think, and that's when you want to start doing this collaboration.
So I love that. That's a reframe of don't try to solve a behavior. Try to identify a problem. Again, that requires our own regulation to not react in the moment to the behavior, but to kind of notice that's a problem.
Well, you don't even have to do it in the moment, though. You can do it when you are about to hop into bed at the end of the night exhausted. Yep. You can say, okay, why am I so exhausted? What were the challenges? Where were the meltdowns today? Where did we have these conflicts? Let me list a few of them, and let me think about what the patterns are here, so I can get ahead of this and just start small. Start in one place. Pick one problem to try to practice collaborative problem solving with.
Okay, then could you walk me through? So the first step is to kind of notice when you're in your own regulated place, and then you got to go to your kid.
Yeah. And when you go to your kid, you want to be very careful not to bring up the behavior and have them on the defensive immediately.
Exactly. That's the first thing I thought. They're just going to get defensive. So
they're going to get defensive if you bring up the behavior, and this smells like a lecture about how they need to change their behavior. But if you bring up the problem you're wanting to solve with them and immediately confirm that you're curious and you're interested and you want to help, it's not magic, but it's going to sound a little different to them. And in my experience, they'll want to hear a little bit more. So what does that look like? In the example I gave, instead of like, hey, I want to talk to you about morning time because we cannot be late anymore because your behavior is making everybody, who wants to participate in that conversation? If I'm the kid, I'm out of there too, right? But what if I started the conversation by saying, hey, you know what? I've noticed that the morning routine's not working so great so far. And I feel really bad about that. And I'm sure there's a good reason why. What do you think's going on with the morning routine? And notice the sort of little clinical trick that I'm using there, which is I'm making the problem, not the kid or the behavior the problem. The problem's the morning routine, not the kid's participation or lack thereof in the morning routine. And I'm being curious and I'm asking for their engagement. I'm asking for their perspective.
Okay, that is a profound shift, what you just said. And it strikes me that it really means we have to not go with an agenda, because kids will sniff out our agenda. Especially because, again, I think a lot of my listeners, and I think a lot of people in general, Dr. Ablon, and I've heard you speak about this as well, are kind of caught in that, punishment reward, whether we're going to have a consequence, right? Or we're going to reward you if you have 10 days of getting to school, and you're kind of coming in, no, none of that. It's more of a genuine curiosity, which is what's happening here. I'm curious, not a let's fix this.
You are coming in with an agenda, but the agenda isn't to impose your will upon your child. The agenda is to try to figure out what's going on. And, if your kid looks at you skeptically, like, what are you trying to do? The great thing about this process is you can be totally transparent. You can say, what I'm trying to do is do a better job of trying to understand what's going on instead of just reacting. And I really want to listen to you and hear from you. And I think maybe if we learn some stuff together, we may have some better ideas about how to handle things in a way that'll work for both of us.
Yeah. I mean, just listening to you, even as an adult, if someone came to me and I really felt like they were trying to collaborate with me, I would respond completely differently.
Yeah, it's funny, when we do trainings and we do these role plays, and people want to role play a kid getting really upset and see sort of, how I would handle that situation.
Yeah.
If you approach it with curiosity and collaboration, it's really hard, even if you're trying to manufacture being angry, to be angry if somebody's saying, hey, I just want to understand what's going on and I want to see if I can help. Now, sure, are there cases where, a kid has had so many conversations like this that they're suspicious? And so you say all the right words and they say some version of, yeah, right. I don't want to talk. You don't care. Something like that, right? That's quite possible that they'll do that. And this is where I give parents, or any adult for that matter, a bunch of guidance about what I think are the sort of tools of empathy. And not just think, because I've studied this for a long time. And it's not rocket science. What it is you ask questions. If need be, you take some educated guesses if you're not getting much from your child. But if they say anything to you, you let them know you heard them by repeating it back in your own words. And if need be, they get upset, shut down, reassure them that this is not some tricky attempt for you just to impose your will. So in other words, if they said to you, I don't want to talk about this. I'm sick of talking to you. You're not going to help. You don't care. You know what I would say? I would say, wow, it sounds like what you're saying is, this doesn't feel like a conversation you want to be a part of because you really don't think that I mean what I'm going to say. Am I hearing you right? All I did was reflective listening. And here's reassurance. I would say something like, and you know what? If I felt like that, I wouldn't want to have a conversation either. So I totally get where you're coming from.
Yeah, you just stay in that curious space no matter what comes. Now, what is the role of boundaries with this? Whether it's with kids or I can just hear this question, right? Well, what if I do need to actually, I just can hear this question coming, what if I do need to stop a behavior that is dangerous, or if someone is,
It's funny though. The reason I laughed was it's funny how we conflate collaboration with a lack of boundaries.
Okay, talk to me about this.
Which makes no sense to me. It's like, when I talk about collaborative problem solving, I'm not talking about anything goes and you're just there to do whatever your child wants and you have no structure, there's no limits. No. In fact, the reason I'm doing collaborative problem solving is because I have concerns as a parent. I have a perspective, I have a point of view, I have things that need to be addressed. But imposing my will is not the way I want to get them addressed. But, boundaries, limits, every bit is important. The whole reason you're having this conversation we're talking about right now is because you need to get to work on time and the kids need to get to school on time. That's the boundary. That's the limit. How we're going to go about achieving it? Collaboratively. But the boundary's there. The limit's there.
Good. That's good. That's good. It's a different strategy. Again, it's a skill. You're teaching us the skill that we're trying to model for them, right? Which is, it's a different skill versus yelling, badgering.
Yes.
And it's a more effective skill.
Well, look, in my experience, most families try, the sort of the basics of trying to cajole or impose their will or use a bribe or a consequence to try to get the kid to do what they want them to do. And they only tend to fall back to collaboration when those things don't work.
Isn't that interesting?
I wish some of our first responses were more collaborative and curious when something's going wrong. Because, that's really ultimately another skill we'd like to teach the next generation of adults, which is when you have a problem with somebody, instead of just lining up and seeing who's more powerful and if you can impose your will, what if the fallback, what if the immediate reflex was, let me see if I can understand where you're coming from. And then I want you to try to see where I'm coming from so we can put our heads together.
It's so interesting when you say it like that, because it is often our last resort, or I throw my hands up in the air. But the word that comes to mind is humility. Mm-hmm. There's a humility in it. And humility is actually rooted in strength.
Yes.
Grasping for control is actually rooted in our own ego, which is understandable. But humility is actually, I'm confident enough and strong enough that I want to understand you.
Yeah.
Tell me, Dr. Ablon, if we can have just a few more minutes of your time.
Of course.
As I'm listening to you, I'm sitting here thinking, this is a skill, what you're teaching us, this collaborative approach that feels very lacking even on a larger stage in our culture.
Yes, sadly.
Could you speak to, because I love how you just said this doesn't have anything to do with not having boundaries or not having your own perspective. Yeah. Could you speak to that?
Well, so I think we've gotten worse and worse, us humans, at listening and trying to understand where somebody else is coming from when we don't agree with their solutions. And what happens is we get into this mode of like dueling solutions. They've got an idea for how they want to go about things, and I think that's the wrong idea. Here's the right idea. And that doesn't lead anywhere good, and it leads to more and more polarization. And what I try to do, and this has come from my work with some pretty tough kids, is I say to myself, I may not love their solution to the problem.
Yeah.
I may not be wild about that. But you know what? I bet there's a good reason behind it. I bet they have very good concerns. And if I could unpack the concerns underneath the solution that I'm not wild about, it might open up some other potential solutions that would still address their concerns, but would be okay with me as well. And that's really the skill that I think is missing right now in this polarized world that we're in, which is being open-minded to, okay, I don't love your idea of how to go about this, but you've got a good reason, and I want to hear what that reason is all about.
That is so, you just nailed it. It is that skill of understanding. I almost want you to say that again. I don't love your solution, but I understand.
But I'm sure you've got a good concern there, right?
There's a valid reason underneath it that I can probably at the end of the day understand and even empathize with.
And I say that all the time to kids and families I work with. I'm sure there's a good reason. I just want to understand what that reason's all about. And if we can understand it. And by the way, the same applies for adults where they may be choosing how to handle things with their kids in a way that I don't love. I don't agree with. But you know what I say to myself? I bet there's a good reason. I'm sure there's a good reason. And if I can understand what the good reason is, and I can express my concerns as well, maybe there's a different way that will address their perspective, their concern, that will accomplish what they want without some of the challenges that come with the way they're approaching it right now.
Yeah, so that is just to summarize, in any relationship, I'm kind of hearing a couple of mantras here, a couple of takeaways. That one is, it's any behavior that is frustrating to us is skill, not will, not to impute will, or to me, there's a moral connotation there, right? They're willfully trying to do this
it's a
thing.
Judgment about their character.
Yes.
Right? I've yet to meet the kid or the adult who prefers doing poorly to doing well.
Yes.
We all want to do well. And
yes.
So if we're not, it's usually because we're having a hard time applying the skills that would be needed in that moment to handle the situation better.
So reshifting our brain to saying to ourselves, what skill don't they have? And then I love this kind of correlating piece that you're saying is there's always a reason. There's something underneath there, that curiosity. If I can get to the root of why, or understanding their reason, why they're doing this, I may not love the outcome, but at least I'm starting with that empathy. And that's going to take me so much further in the relationship.
Yeah, and if I can identify the concerns that are underneath the solution I'm not so wild about, it opens up the opportunity for collaboration, as long as I don't identify the child's concern and then impose my own solution, which would be awfully ironic. Because what I want to do is I want to say, okay, I got beneath the solution that I wasn't wild about to understand why. Let me give you my why now, what I'm worried about, not my solution, but my why. And now we both have our whys on the table. Let's see if we can come up with a solution that'll address both our concerns. In other words, that's mutually satisfactory and obviously realistic and doable too.
Oh, that is unbelievable. If we could all do that. And
it's not easy. It's not easy. But I will tell you this. We talked about having these conversations proactively. If you go into a proactive conversation being really crisp, really clear on what am I worried about, not what's the outcome I want, because I shouldn't have that agenda, but what am I worried about? And I can put that in my back pocket for now while I just concentrate on uncovering my child's concern or perspective. Then when the time's right, I'll whip out my perspective. And now we're ready to collaborate.
That's amazing. How can people, I know you had mentioned you have a resource for my listeners, but how can people learn more they're listening and they want to learn more about this collaborative approach in your work, what's the best way to find you and what you're doing?
Yeah, sure. So I am very proud to direct a program which is here in the Department of Psychiatry at Massachusetts General Hospital called Think Kids. And at Think Kids, we support parents, teachers, all kinds of folks in trying to learn this approach. And we actually have a self-paced course for parents and caregivers where they can learn in detail about this approach and have it applied to their own particular family and kids. And we can provide a link for that. And if people want to use a coupon that we've created for this episode, Best of You, they can plug that coupon in to be able to access that training free of charge, whether that's in English or Spanish. And there's all kinds of other resources, including parent classes, all kinds of things that are right there on our website at thinkkids.org. That's probably the first place I'd suggest people go, and people can easily find my personal website and resources too on the web.
That's amazing. Thank you. These resources are so needed, and I'm so grateful for all your years of research, your work in the trenches. Everything you do is informed by both things, right? Your work in the trenches and in the research, and I'm just grateful. I'm grateful for your wisdom, and we will link to all of that in the show notes. And just grateful for your time. Thank you for, most of my listeners are not necessarily in Boston and, can get to this. So the fact that you're making so many of these resources available digitally is just amazing. Thank you.
Well, my pleasure. I appreciate you having me on and sharing some of these ideas with your audience as well. The more people who can be exposed to some of the basics of this, the better for kids, for the next generation of adults, for us parents right now. So I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Best of You. Be sure to check out the show notes for any resources and links mentioned in the show. You can find those on my website at dralisoncook.com. That's Alison with one L, cook.com. Before you forget, I hope you'll follow the show now so that you don't miss an episode. And I'd love it if you'd go ahead and leave a review. It helps so much to get the word out. I look forward to seeing you back here next Thursday. And remember, as you become the best of who you are, you honor God, you heal others, and you stay true to your God-given self.